The Mediterranean breeze carried the scent of jasmine through Beirut's Rue Verdun on the night of April 9th, 1973. Couples strolled arm in arm past luxury apartments, their laughter mixing with distant music from nightclubs. No one noticed the 6 couples emerging from the waves onto Beirut's darkened beach, men in wetsuits peeling them off to reveal tailored suits and elegant dresses underneath. By dawn, 3 of the most wanted men in the world would be dead in their beds, and the Mossad would deliver a message written in blood. Munich would be avenged. This is the true story of Operation Spring of Youth, one of the most audacious commando raids in espionage history, where Israeli special forces dressed as women walked through enemy territory and executed a surgical strike in the heart of the Palestinian Liberation Organization's stronghold. It was revenge. It was justice. It was personal. Before we dive into this incredible story, if you're fascinated by real espionage operations, covert missions, and the shadowy world of intelligence agencies, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're uncovering the most gripping spy stories from history, stories that Hollywood couldn't invent. Now, let's go back to September 1972, where this tale of vengeance truly begins. Chapter 1. The Massacre That Changed Everything. Munich, September 5th, 1972, 4:30 a.m. The Olympic Village was supposed to be a sanctuary of peace, a place where nations set aside their differences to compete in athletic glory. The Munich Games had been carefully designed to erase the memory of the 1936 Nazi Olympics, to show the world a new democratic Germany. Security was deliberately light. Fences were low, guards were minimal. No one wanted to see armed soldiers patrolling what was meant to be a celebration of international harmony. 8 Palestinian terrorists from the Black September organization scaled a 2-meter fence with alarming ease. They wore tracksuits and carried duffel bags that clinked with automatic weapons. In the pre-dawn darkness, they might have been athletes returning from a late night out. They weren't. At 31 Connollystrasse, the building housing the Israeli Olympic delegation, the terrorists moved with practiced precision. They had floor plans, knew exactly where to go. Wrestling coach Moshe Weinberg heard the commotion first, the sound of the door being forced open. He threw his body against the door, buying precious seconds for others to escape. The terrorists shot him in the mouth. As he lay bleeding, Weinberg lunged at them one final time. They shot him again, killing him instantly. Weightlifter Yosef Romano fought back too. A former paratrooper, he couldn't stand by while his teammates were taken hostage. The terrorists shot him in the chest, then castrated him in front of the other hostages, leaving him to bleed out slowly over hours. It was a message. Resistance would be met with unspeakable brutality. 9 Israeli athletes and coaches were now hostages. The world watched in horror as the crisis unfolded on live television. An estimated 900 million people witnessed the drama, seeing the masked terrorists on balconies, negotiating through intermediaries, demanding the release of 234 Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. The German authorities were paralyzed. They had no experience with such situations, no trained counter-terrorism units. When the terrorists demanded transportation to the airport, the Germans saw it as an opportunity. Perhaps they could resolve this away from the Olympic Village, away from cameras. Fürstenfeldbruck Air Base, the rescue attempt was catastrophically bungled from the start. Police sharpshooters were positioned, but they were sport shooters, not military snipers. They had no night vision equipment, no proper communications. The plan was amateur hour compared to what was needed. When the shooting started, it was chaos. The terrorists realized it was an ambush and began executing the hostages. They threw grenades into the helicopters where the Israelis sat bound. The choppers exploded in fireballs. Those who survived the initial blast were shot as they tried to crawl away from the flames. By the end, all 9 remaining hostages were dead. 5 terrorists were killed. 3 were captured. Israel mourned. Prime Minister Golda Meir sat in her office receiving the news that 11 of her country's sons, athletes who had gone to compete in peace, had been slaughtered. She was 74 years old, a grandmother who had survived the Holocaust, who had helped forge Israel from nothing. She had seen enough Jewish blood spilled for 10 lifetimes. She called an emergency meeting with her closest advisors. In that room, a decision was made that would echo through the halls of international espionage for decades. Every person involved in Munich would be hunted down and killed. There would be no trials, no extradition requests, no diplomatic niceties, just elimination. The operation received a biblical codename, Wrath of God. Meir personally authorized it, and she put it in the hands of Mossad's most lethal division, Kidon, which literally means bayonet. These were the ghosts, the operators who could make people disappear without a trace. They would become angels of death, and their mission would take them across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. But hunting terrorists across the globe was one thing. What Meir wanted, what Israel needed, was a decapitation strike. They needed to hit the PLO leadership where they felt safest, where they thought themselves untouchable. Beirut, Lebanon. The operation would need to be perfect, audacious and absolutely ruthless. It would become known as Operation Spring of Youth, and it would require something the Mossad had never attempted before, a full-scale military raid deep in enemy territory, disguised as a simple evening out. Chapter 2. Planning the Impossible. Mossad Headquarters, Tel Aviv, October 1972. Zvi Zamir, the head of Mossad, stood before a detailed map of Beirut pinned to a wall in a windowless room beneath Mossad headquarters. Cigarette smoke hung thick in the air as Israel's top intelligence and military minds studied the problem before them. The targets were known. PLO leaders living openly in Beirut's fashionable Verdun neighborhood, protected by layers of security, embedded in a hostile capital where Israeli agents would have no backup, no support, no way out if things went wrong. The intelligence had been gathered over months. Mossad had agents throughout Beirut. Some were Lebanese Jews living in secret. Others were Palestinians who had been turned, motivated by money or revenge or ideology, room by room, floor by floor. They had mapped the apartment buildings where the PLO leadership lived. They knew their routines, their guards, their late-night habits. 3 targets emerged as primary. Mohammed Youssef al-Najjar, known as Abu Youssef, was the head of Black September's operations. He was the man who had approved Munich, who had overseen the logistics. He lived in a luxury apartment with his wife and children. Kamal Adwan was the PLO's liaison to terrorist cells operating inside Israel. Every suicide bomber, every attack passed through his hands. Kamal Nasser was the PLO's chief spokesman, the voice that justified terrorism as resistance, that celebrated the murder of Israeli civilians as legitimate warfare. But Beirut posed unique challenges. The city was divided between various factions: Christian militias, Palestinian camps, Lebanese army, Syrian proxies. The Verdun district where the targets lived was in the Muslim section, surrounded by Palestinian refugee camps filled with armed militants. Any Israeli force would be outnumbered thousands to 1. They would need to strike fast, kill their targets, and escape before a massive counterattack could be mounted. Traditional assassination methods wouldn't work. Car bombs, too imprecise, too many civilian casualties. Snipers, buildings were too tall, angles were wrong. Poison, too slow, too uncertain. They needed boots on the ground, operators inside the apartments, confirming kills with their own eyes. Major General Ehud Barak was brought in to plan the military operation. Barak was already a legend, the most decorated soldier in Israeli history, a veteran of countless operations behind enemy lines. He sat with Sayeret Matkal and Shayatet, 13 commanders, Israel's Delta Force and Navy SEALs, and they designed something unprecedented. The plan was insane. Commandos would approach Beirut from the sea in Zodiac boats, land on a public beach in the heart of the city, rendezvous with Mossad agents who would provide cars, then drive through checkpoints and patrols directly to the target buildings. They would assault multiple locations simultaneously, eliminate the targets, and escape back to the beach before Lebanese forces could organize a response. Total time inside Beirut, less than 2 hours. The disguises were crucial. Lebanese soldiers and police manned checkpoints throughout the city, especially at night. A convoy of military vehicles or a group of obvious commandos would be stopped immediately. But couples out for dinner? Groups of friends heading to nightclubs? In cosmopolitan Beirut, that was normal. Sayeret Matkal operators were selected and measured for custom clothing. Some would wear tailored suits, others would don wigs and dresses. The cross-dressing commandos would need to pass casual scrutiny at checkpoints. A wave from the back of a car, a glimpse in the darkness. They wouldn't survive close inspection, but they wouldn't need to. Speed and audacity would be their armor. In a training facility in Israel, they built mock-ups of the target apartments. Operators rehearsed again and again, breaking down doors, clearing rooms, identifying targets, executing the mission in complete darkness. They practiced until they could do it blindfolded, until every movement was muscle memory. Ehud Barak himself would lead the assault team. He was fitted for a brunette wig and a fashionable dress. His men couldn't suppress their laughter during rehearsals, their legendary commander in lipstick and heels. Barak took it in stride. Vanity had no place in operations. If wearing a dress meant completing the mission, he'd wear a ball gown. Meanwhile, Mossad agents in Beirut prepared the ground. Cars were purchased and strategically positioned. Safe houses were established. Escape routes were mapped and remapped. Local agents identified every Palestinian checkpoint, every police station, every variable that could compromise the operation. The intelligence was refined down to the minute. Abu Yusuf typically went to bed around midnight. Kamal Adwan kept later hours, often working until 2 a.m. Kamal Nasser lived alone and was frequently visited by female companions. The assault would need to hit all three simultaneously. If one target was alerted, he might escape or warn the others. A date was chosen, April 9-10, 1973. It was a Monday night turning into Tuesday morning, a quiet time when security would be lowest. Weather forecasts were consulted. They needed calm seas for the Zodiac boats, no moon for the landing. The rules of engagement were simple: eliminate the primary targets and anyone who engaged them with weapons. Minimize civilian casualties, but mission success was paramount. If they encountered heavy resistance, they were authorized to fight their way out by any means necessary. Israeli Air Force jets would provide cover, ready to strike if ground forces became overwhelmed. Golda Meir gave her final approval. She understood the risks. If the operation failed, if commandos were captured, it would be an international disaster, possibly even an act of war that could widen into regional conflict. But she also understood necessity. Munich demanded a response that terrorists everywhere would understand. You can run, but you cannot hide. Not in Europe, not in Beirut, not anywhere. On April 9, 1973, teams began moving into position. Navy missile boats positioned themselves off the Lebanese coast. Aircraft were armed and readied. In a fortified room in Tel Aviv, generals and intelligence chiefs gathered around communications equipment, ready to monitor the operation in real time. And on a darkened beach south of Haifa, men in wetsuits checked their weapons one final time, adjusted their wigs and dresses packed in waterproof bags, and climbed into Zodiac boats. The Mediterranean was calm. The night was dark. And Operation Spring of Youth, the most audacious targeted killing operation in espionage history, was about to begin. Chapter 3. Into the Heart of Darkness. Off the coast of Beirut, April 9th, 1973, 11:30 p.m. The Zodiac boats cut through black water, engines throttled low to reduce noise. 6 inflatable craft carried the assault teams northward along the Lebanese coast. The men inside were silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Some checked weapons for the 10th time, others stared at the dark coastline ahead, mentally rehearsing their roles. They wore wetsuits over civilian clothes. Beneath the neoprene were tailored suits, dresses, fashionable shoes. In waterproof bags they carried wigs, makeup, jewelry, and enough firepower to start a small war. Ehud Barak sat in the lead boat, his face blackened with grease, his eyes fixed on the beach ahead. He could see the lights of Beirut spreading across the hills, a beautiful, dangerous city where they would be outnumbered thousands to one. There was no backup plan. If things went wrong, they would fight until they died or somehow made it back to sea. Those were the only options. The boats slid onto the sand of a beach just north of the city center. Commandos leapt out, dragging the boats into the shadows. They moved with practiced efficiency, stripping off wetsuits, pulling on civilian clothes. Barak stepped into his dress and heels, adjusted his wig. In the darkness, with his athletic build and height, the disguise was passable enough. Others helped each other with makeup, a surreal scene, elite operators applying lipstick before a combat mission. 3 rental cars appeared on the coastal road, headlights flashing the prearranged signal. Mossad agents had positioned them earlier in the evening. The commandos piled in, couples in the back seats, arms around each other, some kissing to complete the illusion. 2 additional cars carried the heavy weapons team, their gear hidden under blankets. They drove into Beirut proper, heading toward Rue Verdun. At the first checkpoint, a Lebanese policeman waved his flashlight casually, saw what appeared to be young couples returning from dinner or nightclubs, and waved them through. The teams exhaled collectively. The disguises were working. The convoy split up. Team Aleph headed for Abu Yusef's building on Rue Verdun. Team Bet targeted Kamal Adwan's apartment several blocks away. Team Gimel would hit Kamal Nasser's residence. A 4th team, heavily armed, would establish a perimeter and engage any Palestinian militia attempting to interfere. At 1:00 a.m., Barak's team reached Abu Yusef's building, a modern 6-story structure with a marble lobby and a sleeping doorman. They parked, and the couples exited casually, as if returning home. In the elevator, they shed their civilian personas. Wigs came off. Weapons were drawn from bags. By the time the elevator reached the 6th floor, they were a lethal commando unit. The door to apartment 6B was reinforced, but they had come prepared. A breaching charge was set, shaped to direct the blast inward. 3 seconds. The explosion shattered the night's silence, the door flying inward in splinters. Barak was first through, his suppressed pistol up, scanning for threats. Abu Yusef was in the hallway in his pajamas, confused, reaching for a weapon on a side table. Barak shot him twice in the chest. The PLO operations chief collapsed against the wall, sliding down, his blood smearing the wallpaper. His wife appeared, screaming. A commando gently pushed her into a bedroom, closed the door. She was not a target. The apartment was cleared room by room. Documents were photographed, files were grabbed. Intelligence was a secondary objective, but valuable. They had 90 seconds before they needed to move. They used 87. 6 blocks away, Team Bet was having a harder time. Kamal Adwan's building had an armed guard in the lobby who reached for his AK-47 when he saw armed men entering. A 3-round burst dropped him before he could fire. The sound was suppressed, but the commotion drew attention. Residents peered from doorways, then slammed them shut when they saw the commandos. Adwan's apartment was on the 4th floor. He had better security, a reinforced door, a security camera. The commandos didn't bother with subtlety. Breaching charges blew the door off its hinges. Adwan was in his office, surrounded by maps and documents. He lunged for a submachine gun mounted on the wall. He never reached it. 3 commandos fired simultaneously, the bullets cutting him down before he could turn around. He died instantly, collapsing over his desk, scattering papers across the floor. Team Gimmel's mission was the fastest. Kamal Nasser lived alone on the 3rd floor of a luxury apartment building. He had grown complacent, felt safe in Beirut's heart. His door wasn't even reinforced. They kicked it in, found him in bed with a woman who wasn't his wife. She screamed. Nasser tried to negotiate, tried to talk his way out, offering money, information, anything. The team leader, a Yemeni Jew who had lost cousins in a Palestinian terror attack, shot him in the face. The propaganda chief of the PLO died with his mouth open, pleading. All 3 hits were completed within 10 minutes of each other. Now came the hardest part, getting out. The city was waking up to violence. Gunfire had been heard. Palestinian militias were mobilizing. Lebanese police were receiving confused reports of armed men, explosions, killings. Checkpoints were being reinforced. The teams raced back toward the beach in their cars. At an intersection near the Sabra refugee camp, they encountered a PLO roadblock that hadn't existed on their way in. Armed men were stopping cars, searching for Israelis. The lead car approached slowly, as if to comply. When they were 20 meters away, the heavy weapons team opened fire with a mounted machine gun. The PLO fighters dove for cover, but 2 were cut down immediately. The convoy punched through, pedal to the floor, bullets sparking off the rear panels. Another checkpoint appeared ahead, Lebanese army this time. The operators made a split-second decision. They couldn't fight the national army without creating an international incident. They swerved onto a side street, tires screaming, and took an alternate route through a Christian neighborhood. The militia there didn't interfere with what they assumed were Lebanese forces pursuing Palestinians. Ironically, the city's sectarian divisions provided cover. Behind them, Beirut erupted. PLO fighters were shooting at shadows, at each other, at anything that moved. Katyusha rockets were fired blindly toward the Christian sectors. It was chaos, exactly what the planners had hoped for, confusion that would mask the Israeli escape. The teams reached the beach at 1:47 a.m., less than 2 hours after landing. The Zodiacs were where they had left them, guarded by the remaining commandos. They piled in, pushing the boats into the surf. Engines roared to life. Behind them, Beirut's waterfront exploded with searchlights and gunfire as defenders realized the attackers were escaping by sea. Lebanese patrol boats scrambled to intercept, but Israeli missile boats appeared from the darkness, their weapons locked on any craft approaching the Zodiacs. The message was clear: try to pursue and you'll be sunk. The Lebanese boats turned back. By 3:00 a.m., the commandos were aboard Israeli Navy ships heading south. They radioed a single code word to Tel Aviv: Champagne. Mission success. All targets eliminated. All operators accounted for. 0 casualties. In Tel Aviv, Golda Meir received the news in her office. She had been awake all night, chain-smoking, pacing. When the word came, she sat down heavily, closed her eyes, and wept. For Munich. For the 11 athletes. For a justice that had finally, brutally, been delivered. Chapter 4. Aftermath. The Legend and the Cost. Beirut, April 10th, 1973, dawn. As the sun rose over Beirut, the city resembled a war zone. Smoke drifted from burning vehicles. Blood stained the marble lobbies of luxury apartment buildings. 3 of the PLO's most important leaders lay dead in their homes, killed by an enemy that had walked through the heart of Lebanon's capital, executed them, and vanished like ghosts. The Lebanese government was in chaos. President Suleiman Frangieh convened an emergency cabinet meeting. The Prime Minister demanded answers. How had Israeli commandos landed on a public beach, driven through checkpoints, assassinated 3 men, and escaped? The army and internal security forces had no answers. The operation had been so swift, so precise, that by the time anyone realized what was happening, the Israelis were already at sea. Palestinian factions erupted in fury and recrimination. How had security failed so catastrophically? Conspiracy theories proliferated. There must have been collaborators, traitors within the PLO. In the weeks that followed, internal purges would see dozens of Palestinians executed by their own people, suspected of aiding the Israelis. Some were guilty. Most were not. The paranoia that Operation Spring of Youth injected into the Palestinian resistance would do almost as much damage as the assassinations themselves. The international community reacted with predictable division. The United States publicly condemned the operation as a violation of Lebanese sovereignty, while privately acknowledging its operational brilliance. The CIA studied every detail, learning lessons that would influence American special operations for decades. Soviet advisors in Beirut filed reports warning that Western intelligence capabilities were more advanced than anticipated. France, with its historic ties to Lebanon, issued strong diplomatic protests, but intelligence sharing between French and Israeli services continued uninterrupted. In the shadowy world of espionage, public condemnation and private cooperation often coexisted comfortably. The operation's strategic impact exceeded even optimistic projections. Beyond killing 3 key leaders, Spring of Youth shattered the PLO's sense of security. If Israel could reach them in Beirut, the one place they felt untouchable, then nowhere was safe. Senior operatives began moving constantly, sleeping in different locations every night, trusting no one. This paranoia degraded operational effectiveness. Terror attacks became less frequent, less sophisticated, because the planners were focused on survival rather than operations. For the Mossad, Operation Spring of Youth became a defining moment. It demonstrated that Israeli intelligence could conduct complex operations anywhere in the world with precision and audacity. The operation joined the pantheon of legendary Mossad missions: the capture of Adolf Eichmann in Argentina, the raid on Entebbe, the destruction of Iraq's nuclear reactor. It was proof that Israel's long arm could reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. Ehud Barak, the commander who had led the assault in a dress and heels, became a national hero. The photograph of him in disguise, leaked years later, became iconic, symbolizing Israeli resourcefulness and willingness to do whatever it took to protect the nation. Barak would later become Prime Minister of Israel, his military legend paving his political path. But Operation Spring of Youth was only one component of a much larger campaign. The broader assassination program, Operation Wrath of God, continued for years. Mossad kill teams hunted Black September operatives across Europe. Ali Hassan Salameh, the operation's chief planner, codenamed the Red Prince, was killed by a car bomb in Beirut in 1979. Mahmoud Hamshari was killed by an exploding telephone in Paris. Hussein al-Bashir was shot in Cyprus. One by one, everyone connected to Munich was eliminated. However, the campaign was not without catastrophic errors. In Lillehammer, Norway, in 1973, Mossad agents mistakenly killed Ahmed Bouchiki, a Moroccan waiter, believing him to be Salameh. The botched operation led to the arrest of several Mossad operatives and an international scandal that temporarily curtailed Israeli assassination operations in Europe. It was a stark reminder that even the world's best intelligence agencies were fallible, and mistakes cost innocent lives. The Palestinian response was equally bloody. PLO factions intensified their attacks on Israeli civilians, seeking revenge for Beirut. The cycle of violence, assassination, followed by terror attack, followed by assassination, would continue for decades. Operation Spring of Youth solved nothing in terms of the underlying Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was vengeance, not peace. But for Israel in 1973, fresh from the trauma of Munich, vengeance was exactly the point. There's a philosophical question buried in Operation Spring of Youth's legacy. Does targeted assassination of terrorists work? The intelligence community remains divided. Proponents argue that eliminating experienced operatives saves lives by preventing attacks. Critics counter that it creates martyrs, inspires retaliation, and does nothing to address root causes of conflict. Both perspectives contain truth. What's undeniable is that Spring of Youth changed modern intelligence operations. It demonstrated that with sufficient planning, resources, and operational security, special forces could conduct precision strikes deep in hostile territory. The operation's success influenced American thinking that led to Delta Force's creation. It shaped Israeli doctrine that would be applied in countless operations over the following decades. When Navy SEALs eliminated Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, Pakistan in 2011, they were executing a mission profile that owed intellectual debt to what Ehud Barak's team accomplished in Beirut 38 years earlier. For the commandos who executed the mission, life continued. Most returned to their units, their identities classified for decades. Some are still alive today, elderly men who rarely speak about what they did in the spring of 1973. When they do talk, it's not about the kills, but about the preparation, the teamwork, the absolute trust they had in each other. They frame it not as murder, but as justice. Imperfect, violent justice, but justice nonetheless. The families of Abu Yusuf, Kamal Adwan, and Kamal Nasser see it differently. To them, their fathers, husbands, and brothers were resistance fighters killed in their beds by a foreign power's death squads. Their children grew up with the trauma of that night, some joining militant groups themselves, perpetuating the cycle. In the calculus of violence, there are rarely clean answers. Golda Meir, who authorized the operation, never expressed public regret. She believed deeply that Israel's survival depended on absolute deterrence. The world needed to know that Jewish blood was no longer cheap, that attacks would be answered with overwhelming force. In her later years, she did acknowledge the psychological toll of sending men to kill, of authorizing operations that would haunt her sleep. Leadership, she observed, was about making terrible choices and living with the consequences. Today, Rue Verdun in Beirut is a bustling commercial district. The buildings where the assassinations occurred still stand. There are no plaques, no markers indicating what happened there on that April night 50 years ago. The Lebanese prefer to forget, the Palestinians remember in anger, and the Israelis. The Israelis remember it as one of their finest hours, however dark those hours were. Operation Spring of Youth proved that intelligence agencies could conduct military-style operations with surgical precision. It validated the concept of proactive counterterrorism, striking the enemy before they could strike you. It also demonstrated the moral complexity of such operations. 3 men killed in their homes, justified by their role in killing 11 others. Where does justice end and revenge begin? The answer depends entirely on which side of the operation you were on. In the final analysis, Operation Spring of Youth was a masterpiece of intelligence craft and military execution. It was also an act of state-sanctioned vengeance that solved nothing about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but sent a message heard around the world. There would be a reckoning for Munich. That reckoning came on an April night in Beirut, delivered by men in dresses who were among the deadliest operators on the planet. The Mediterranean still laps at the same beach where they landed. The apartments still house families. Life goes on. But for one night in 1973, Beirut was the stage for an operation that would echo through intelligence history, a reminder that in the shadow world of espionage and counterterrorism, nowhere is truly safe and no one is truly untouchable.